Hello. Hi, Lana. Hi, Barbara Wernick. Hi, Evelina. How are you? I hope everybody can hear me okay. I'm going to do a little sharing. Yeah. Hmm. Okay, my sharing interface is a little different tonight. I have no idea why that is so. Evelina says sound is good. Okay, that's good. I'm glad the sound is good. As far as I know, so far, I've only shared this to my timeline. Facebook seems to have changed things around on me. Okay, now my sound should be even better since I'm going through my mic. Lana says, greetings from Minneapolis. Kay says, hi. Dolores says, sharing. Yeah, please do your best to share. I don't know what's going on with my sharing interface, but things are a lot different tonight than they normally are. And I have to say, I don't know why. I don't know what Facebook is trying to do. But anyway, you will notice that I've changed the title. Okay, I've changed the title from what I advertised in the promo. And the reason why I did is because I didn't want this content to be taken down out of hand, which is kind of what I was expecting would happen. So, okay, I noticed today I've been hearing the content of other people has been taken down, apparently for no reason. Anyway, I need your help even more tonight because it doesn't look like I can share in the way that I used to, up until tonight, that is. It seems to be just restricting me to posting on my timeline or to having watch parties, separate watch parties at a number of different places. Evelina says, lately FB keeps changing, adding new apps, constantly annoying. Yeah, they seem to be trying to find ways to control content in a way that's more acceptable to them, to their people. Okay, so let's get over these difficulties, or let's deal with things in spite of these particular difficulties. Uh, and let me continue as long as the sound is good. Okay, I'm going to continue. I still don't have that technical difficulty in sharing pages, but I will go through the various articles I've scheduled here tonight, and you will see the relationship that it has to the overall topic. The topic has been changed, of course, as you know. It now is federal moves against protests in cities and resistance. So I was careful with the wording, okay, of my title, and careful with the description, okay, as well, in hopes to safeguard the actual content, which I do not intend to change, of course. So here we are. Before I get into the main topic, I wanted to start by calling your attention to an article by Jessica Corbett in Common Dreams that appeared this evening. And it's called Yale Study on $600 Unemployment Lifeline Championed by Democrats Destroys Favorite GOP Talking Point. In other words, this is about the conflict over the relief bill. So Jessica Corbett points to a new study by Yale economists that came out this week that debunks the repeated GOP talking point that the $600 federal expansion of unemployment benefits has disincentivized people from returning to work. Findings published the same day Republicans released a coronavirus relief proposal, which critics condemned as a, quote, utter disgrace, unquote, that will, quote, unleash widespread suffering on people nationwide. The CARES Act that Congress passed and President Trump signed in late March provided those qualified for unemployment insurance with an extra $600 per week on top of state benefits, a boost that meant total payments for some low-wage or middle-class workers exceeded their normal weekly incomes. God bless you, honey. With the GOP in the Senate now refusing to pass an extension approved by the Democrat-controlled House, those added benefits are set to expire on July 31st. Despite polling that shows the public popularity of the added boost, and economists warning that taking it away would spell financial catastrophe for the country, the Trump administration and GOP lawmakers who oppose an extension claim It encouraged layoffs early in the pandemic and deters people who make more from the UI benefits than their former jobs from returning to work as businesses reopen. The Yale study, however, destroys that Republican talking point. The Economist examined weekly data from Homebase, a firm that provides scheduling and time clock software to small businesses, and found, quote, no evidence that more generous benefits disincentivized work, either at the onset of the expansion or as firms look to return to business over time. Dave Jamieson tweeted, here's a nice reminder that this hang-up with the GOP that could threaten the economy, the idea that generous jobs benefits are preventing people from going back to work, is a fake problem, as so many problems the GOP points to, and the Democrats too, in fact, are fake problems. And there's a link and a quote. The report found that workers receiving larger increases in unemployment benefits experienced very similar gains in employment by early May relative to workers with less generous benefit increases. People with more generously expanded benefits also resumed working at a similar or slightly quicker rate than others did, according to the report. The data do not show a relationship between benefit generosity and employment paths after the CARES Act, which could be due to the collapse of labor demand during the COVID-19 crisis, said co-author and Yale economics professor Joseph Altanji. Although the home-based data does not represent the entire U.S. Labor market, as it is primarily focused on hourly workers at businesses like bars, restaurants, and retail stores, the segment of the workforce studied by the researchers has been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Also, as Yale News noted, the researchers tested their results against employment outcomes in the federal government's current population survey, a more representative sample of the labor market than the home-based data, and obtained similar findings. The Yale study found that people with expanded unemployment benefits actually resume working at a similar or slightly quicker rate than others did. As MarketWatch reported on Wednesday, Chicago Federal Reserve found a similar trend. Those currently collecting benefits search more than twice as intensely as those who have exhausted their benefits. A recent study conducted by the Chicago Fed concluded, typically, unemployment benefits last 6 months, and on average, pay individuals approximately 30% of their previous weekly salary, according to the Chicago Fed. People on unemployment benefits, on average, spend more than 14 hours a week job searching and send more than 12 applications per month. So there's the important finding. Typically, unemployment benefits last 6 months, and on average, pay individuals approximately 35% of their previous weekly salary, according to the Chicago Fed. People on unemployment benefits on average spend more than 14 hours a week job searching and send more than 12 applications a month. The Health and Economic Recovery Omnibus Emergency Solutions, that is the HEROES Act, that House Democrats passed in May would extend the $600 boost to UI benefits through January. But Senate Leader Mitch McConnell has refused to put that measure to a vote. The Senate GOP's new HEALS Act, released Monday, would temporarily cut the weekly boost from $600 to $200 until states can implement a new, more complex system to pay laid off workers 70% of what they earn before losing their jobs. Although the proposal is reportedly approved by the Trump White House, critics warn that the system would likely overwhelm states and cause notable delays in relief to those who need it the most. As congressional debates over COVID-19 relief drag on, CNBC Change Research polling results published Wednesday show that most voters in key swing states want lawmakers to continue the aid that was implemented in previous relief legislation, including the $600 per week boost to unemployment insurance. Across Arizona, Florida, Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, 62% of voters somewhat or strongly support continuing that specific initiative. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer suggested in a Tuesday night's televised interview with Chris Hayes of MSNBC that Republicans in Congress are failing to serve not only the American public, but also their own electoral interests by trying to cut government assistance during the health crisis. Here's what they think. Let them eat cake, Senator Schumer says of the GOP. They're so enthralled by the right-wing ideologues who say don't spend any government money that they're not even doing what would be, let alone good for the country, even in their own self-interest. And there's a video from Senator Schumer there that I will not share. It's just a disgrace what their bill does, Schumer said broadly of the Republicans' HEALS Act, which he called a giveaway to corporate interests. He said, quote, "We Democrats are standing firm," unquote. "We know the needs are real. We know the needs are deep. We know working people need help, and we're going to fight for the very strong and very bold bill the House passed called the HEROES Act." Well, the HEROES Act was not that bold or that strong, but at this point it would be very good if they fought for it, but from what we're hearing, they're not really fighting very hard. Supposedly, they seem ready to cave in again, but I'm just sort of hearing that. Maybe that's not so. Hopefully, that is not so. Now let us move on to what's going on in the federal sphere. Okay. Common Dreams had another article today by Jake Johnson called "This is Kidnapping." The video shows plainclothes NYPD officers throwing a protester into an unmarked van. And there it is. I guess you can't see it because I can't share it, but this is a photo from a phone of police in New York, local police, uniformed, violently forcing protesters into an unmarked van. And the New York Civil Liberties Union said these are the actions. So the police force thinks they can act with impunity. They snatched an 18-year-old protester off the street, threw her into an unmarked minivan, and sped away without explanation. A disturbing incident that immediately drew comparisons to the authoritarian tactics recently used by federal agents in Portland, Oregon. Incredibly disturbing. We need answers, New York City Council Speaker Corey Johnson tweeted late Tuesday, as videos of what witnesses described as a kidnapping went viral on social media. The New York Civil Liberties Union says, we won't allow this in our city, quote unquote. One video shows several officers dressed in shorts and T-shirts rushing out of an unmarked Kia minivan. They even got the brand of the minivan, grabbing a demonstrator from the middle of the street and forcing her into the van as NYPD officers with bikes formed a barrier around the vehicle. The protester was later identified by friends as an 18-year-old trans woman by the name of Nikki. Quote, suddenly there was an unmarked gray van that moved out in front of us that had been waiting for us, unquote. One witness said to the Gothamist, and quote again, 4 guys jumped out and a line of police bicycles came out from down the block. We hadn't seen them. They pushed us back. They grabbed Nikki like she was a rag doll, unquote. And there was a tweet about that. Also, a video attached to the tweet, which I will not play. And someone by the name of Lauren at the Feisty Mexarican tweeted, here's my full video of what happened on 25th and 2nd in New York City. Keep in mind this was a peaceful protest that was headed to Madison Square Park for a meditation. An unmarked van snatched a protester and NYPD started attacking us. And there's a video of that. Quote, our civil liberties are on the brink, unquote. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted in response to the incident, quote, this is not a drill. There is no excuse for snatching women off the street and throwing them into unmarked vans. To not protect our rights is to give them away. It is our responsibility to resist authoritarianism, unquote. In a statement posted to Twitter late Tuesday, after the officers' action sparked widespread condemnation, the NYPD claimed the woman taken into custody in an unmarked van was wanted for damaging police cameras during 5 separate criminal incidents in and around City Hall Park, unquote. When officers from the warrant squad took the woman into custody in a gray NYPD minivan this evening, they were assaulted with rocks and bottles, the NYPD said. An account that witnesses dismissed as completely false. Quote again, the warrant squad uses unmarked vehicles to effectively locate wanted suspects. Clara Kraber, a 20-year-old Oxford student who witnessed the incident, told the Gothamist that, quote, none of what happened whatsoever, none of that happened whatsoever, referring to the NYPD's claim that demonstrators threw rocks and bottles at the officers. Kraber said officers indiscriminately pepper sprayed demonstrators as the cops shoved Nikki into the unmarked van. We literally turned the corner and were met with a line of police who attacked us without warning, said Kraber. Chris Hayes tweeted, this is kidnapping. And actually, he retweeted a tweet by Michelle Elhook. Michelle Elhook, H-O-O-Q, who tweeted, New York City NYC is taking after Portland. A trans femme protester was pulled into an unmarked van at the Abolition Park protest. This was at 2nd Avenue and 25th Street. And there's an American flag turned upside down by the protesters. And they certainly experienced the American flag being turned upside down. The New York Civil Liberties Union, the New York State affiliate of the ACLU, called the NYPD's behavior horrifying and indefensible, quote unquote, said it is investigating. Quote, we're looking into the incident that happened tonight, but one thing is for certain, violently forcing protesters into an unmarked van are the actions of a police force that think they can act with impunity. And quote again, we won't allow this in our city, unquote. So, taking a page out of the federal book. Taking a page out of the federal book. And there's Bill Barr. Real answers demanded after Barr dodges on government authority to aim, quote, intrusive surveillance tools, unquote, at protesters. There's another one by Jessica Corbett. This one was on July 28th. And in the article, there's a picture of U.S. Attorney General William Barr testifying before the House Judiciary Committee in the Congressional Auditorium at the U.S. Capitol Visitors Center on July 28th. And this article focuses on the exchanges between Representative Zoe Lofgren and William Barr during the Tuesday House Judiciary Committee hearing. This prompted calls for an immediate explanation from the Trump administration about the legal basis for using advanced surveillance techniques on protesters nationwide. Lofgren, a California Democrat, explained in a series of tweets that she asked Barr to detail under what authority the U.S. government can use intrusive surveillance tools against protesters. Barr, Lofgren said, declined to give a real answer, quote unquote. Congresswoman specifically asked about the potential deployment of cell site simulators, facial recognition and sweeping surveillance of internet activity. And Barr replied, quote, I really can't speak to those instances if they've in fact occurred, unquote. After Lofgren clarified she was seeking an answer about the legal basis of using such tactics, the Attorney General said that, quote, most of our cyber activities are conducted by the FBI under their law enforcement powers to detect and prevent crime, unquote. As the Congresswoman noted on Twitter, her questioning of Barr came amid a federal crackdown on protests against police brutality toward Black Americans in Portland, Oregon, and President Donald Trump's threats to send teams to other major cities. And Zoe Lofgren said, during our at-House Judiciary hearing, she tweeted, I asked AG Barr about the surveillance of protests in Portland and around the country, the constitutional rights of demonstrators should never be violated, and she tweeted this over 3 threads. The first one had a video attachment. The Demand Progress responded with a statement calling on Barr to immediately disclose any legal basis he sees for the federal surveillance of protesters. The advocacy group also put the exchange into the context of Barr's history and broader concerns about government surveillance under the Trump administration. Today, Attorney General Barr refused to acknowledge whether the government is conducting dragnet surveillance of internet activity, said Sean Vitka, Senior Policy Counsel at Demand Progress. Quote again, he further refused to acknowledge widely reported mass surveillance practices that he may have authorized when sending the Drug Enforcement Administration and other agencies after protesters, unquote. The public needs to know whether Attorney General Barr thinks President Trump can conduct mass surveillance of protesters without congressional authorization, Vitka argued, noting that Barr has personally authorized lawless mass surveillance in this country before, and did so by relying on radically aggressive interpretations of executive power, by secretly abusing statutory authority, and by hiding it under the DEA. The questions Lofgren posed during the hearing were critically important, explained Vitka. Quote, It is frighteningly plausible that Attorney General Barr has told the Trump administration it may conduct domestic mass surveillance with effectively no limits, potentially even in the absence of congressional authorization, he said. Quote again, the consequences would be staggering, and the chilling of free speech is already being felt. Referencing reports that U.S. government planes flew over Black Lives Matter protests in Washington, D.C. last month and potentially spied on participants, Vitka added that the planes are in the air. We need these answers now, unquote. The Demand Progress statement highlighted recent examples of other members of Congress demanding answers from the administration about surveillance, particularly considering that the controversial Section 215 of the U.S. Patriot Act expired earlier this year and has not been reauthorized by federal lawmakers. Senator Patrick Leahy and Mike Lee of Utah sent a letter to Barr and Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe, that is Ratcliffe, on July 21st, asking them to confirm that federal agencies have terminated surveillance operations authorized under the now expired FISA provisions and other related questions about the government's spy powers, along with highlighting the letter, which requests that Barr and Ratcliffe respond with answers by August 7th. The advocacy group pointed out how Patrick Hovakimian, the nominee for general counsel of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, recently responded to a pre-hearing question from Senator Ron Wyden. Wyden asked, does the government collect web browsing and internet search history pursuant to Section 215? If so, what are or should be any limitations on such collection or the dissemination and use of such information? Does the government collect web browsing or internet search history pursuant to FISA Pen Register / Trap and Trace authorities, unquote? Hovakimian responded, quote, I believe it is important for the IC to use its authorities appropriately against valid intelligence targets. The amendment to Titles 5 of FISA made by Section 215 of the U.S. Patriot Act expired on March 15, 2020, and to date have not been reauthorized. Given those recent changes between lawmakers and the administration, Demand Progress declared that Barr's refusal to answer Lofgren's questions today adds concern that all of this may be occurring in secret without congressional authorization or oversight, unquote. And, of course, he should have added, in violation of the law, since it hasn't been reauthorized anymore. It's now illegal. Sorry, honey?
All I can see is the black thing, and it says, sorry, we're having trouble playing this video.
Oh, I'm not getting that.
You don't see it on yours?
I see mine spinning around. I have to.
Did I put it in there?
No, I'll check on my system. Okay. I have a lot of shares tonight, but I don't have too much attendance. I have 118 shares, which is certainly a decent amount. What is IC related to FISA court? Okay, I think it refers to the intelligence agencies. I don't think, okay, it's international. Is anybody else having trouble seeing? Anybody having trouble with the sound? It has
I got your back.
inadvertently shifted to the speakers again rather than my mic. I have no idea why that happens, but I dislike it entirely. So anyway, uh, going onward, today on July 29th, there was an article published in Common Dreams by Owen Higgins, and that's about the announcement that had been made by the governor of Oregon, saying that federal agents were going to be leaving Portland, would begin leaving Portland on Thursday. However, the headline of this article is, quote, "The withdrawal is conditional," unquote, after Oregon governor says federal agents are leaving Portland on Thursday. DHS and the White House, Department of Homeland Security, that is, and the White House says not yet. And Owen Higgins starts off with an immediate withdrawal of federal forces in Portland, Oregon, appearing unlikely Wednesday, even after Governor Kate Brown, who called the officers, quote, an occupying force, unquote, said they would leave the city on Thursday. Excuse me. In a statement, Brown said that federal agents will begin leaving the city if certain conditions are met, and that local and state police would take over protection of the outside of federal buildings in downtown Portland. Federal agents will mostly remain inside, she said, though there will be some forces remaining outside. The local Oregon officers of the Oregon State Police will provide protection for free speech and the security of the exterior of the courthouse with the Federal Protective Service, said Brown. And, quote again, a limited contingent of federal officials who act as building security year round will remain and will stay focused on the interior of the courthouse. And their tweet came by Athol K. Athol K. Acharya said this includes BORTAC, which is the Border Protection Tactical Force, I think, but does not seem to include FPS, the Federal Protective Service, and definitely doesn't include the U.S. Marshals. So it looks like at most it's a limited withdrawal that might take place. This was a retweet after Governor Kate Brown had tweeted, after my discussions with VP Pence and others, the federal government has agreed to withdraw federal officers from Portland. They have acted as an occupying force and brought violence. Starting tomorrow, all Customs and Border Protection and IC officers will leave downtown Portland. I guess that's not at all sure to happen anymore. Acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf, in contrast to Brown's comments, said in a statement that his agents would remain on the streets in Portland until he deemed it necessary to withdraw, not on the governor's timeline. Quote, the department will continue to maintain our current augmented federal law enforcement personnel in Portland until we are assured that the Hatfield Federal Courthouse and other federal properties will no longer be attacked, said Wolf. In an appearance on Fox News Wednesday afternoon, Wolf doubled down, telling anchor Bill Hemmer that agents would not be leaving the city on Thursday, despite Brown's claims that they would. We are not leaving Portland until we are assured the courthouse is safe and secure, said Wolf. We will continue to keep law enforcement officers in the area. Acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf says Governor of Oregon's tweet claiming federal forces will imminently leave Portland is false. This is a tweet I'm reading from now, which is by A. Atrupar. I'm sorry, Aaron Rupar is his name. Must be Aaron T. Rupar, which translates to Atrupar on Twitter. His handle is Atrupar. Acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf says Governor of Oregon's tweet claiming federal forces will imminently leave Portland is false. Quote, we are not leaving Portland until we are sure the courthouse is safe and secure. We'll continue to keep law enforcement officers in the area. The White House confirmed that position to the Washington Examiner Wednesday, quote, as the President and Secretary Wolf have both made clear federal law enforcement officers will not leave until the seat of justice in Portland is secure. White House Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Matthews said in a statement. The Washington Post shed some light on the details of the plan. The Federal Protective Service, the DHS agency responsible for protecting federal properties around the country, will remain at the courthouse with assistance from U.S. Marshals, Wolf said. Some state police will join them inside the perimeter fence, but the DHS wants the state troopers and local police to keep the angry crowds and rioters away from the building, according to DHS officials who provided details on condition of anonymity because they were not allowed to discuss it publicly. Federal agents descended on Portland earlier in the month in response to ongoing protests triggered by the killing of George Floyd by 4 Minneapolis police officers in May. Brown and Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler were both highly critical of the federal presence in the city, with Brown tweeting that the agents, quote, have acted as an occupying force and brought violence, unquote. So we are seeing Twitter resistance here. Quote, the federal occupation of our community has brought a new kind of fear to our streets, said Wheeler. The federal occupation of our community has brought a new kind of fear to our streets, he tweeted. Federal agents nearly killed a demonstrator, and their presence has led to increased violence and vandalism in our downtown core. That was a retweet of the previous tweet from Kate Brown saying they were getting out. According to the New York Times, Portland has seen more than 60 days of consecutive protests since Mr. Floyd's death. Much of the strife in the city has been between Portland police officers and the protesters. But after President Trump issued an executive order to protect statues and federal property, federal officials sent tactical teams, which sent the militarized tactical teams to Portland. They employed aggressive tactics to keep demonstrators away from federal property. One protester was shot in the head with a crowd control munition, and a Navy veteran was hit repeatedly with a baton as he stood still, in a tactic that was challenged in court by the Oregon Attorney General. The federal officers used unmarked vans to target protesters for arrest. Due to the conflicting statements on the timing and scope of the withdrawal, journalist Joshua Potash cautioned against reading too deeply into Brown's statement and urged demonstrators to remain vigilant. Quote, the withdrawal is conditional, like the courthouse being secure, said Potash. Quote again, so feds can stay as long as they want, uh, uh, unquote. I'm not sure that the issue is whether feds can stay or feds can go. Feds can certainly stay to protect federal property. That, to my mind, is the right of the federal government, however ill advised it may have been to send in federal officers to do that, okay, at this time. But as far as the feds, but going on to local property as they please, apprehending people who are not on federal property, putting people into unmarked vans, trying to suppress their free speech while they're on local property. It seems to me these are violations of the civil liberties, okay, of people, and are certainly illegal. They are against the law. And so the federal officials are responsible for breaking the law, including and especially the ones who have ordered them to act in such a way. And we have to keep that in mind. The violence used by the federal officials, the tactics that they employed involved the violation, okay, of civil liberties, and the extremity of some of these tactics is certainly fascist in character. I don't think there is much debate about that. Or if there is much debate, I don't think a debate is warranted. Here's one from Truth Out. The advice is, if we don't want, from the article, the headline is, if we don't want armed feds occupying our cities, we must hit the streets. So the proposal in this one is to resist by hitting the streets, and the article was written by Shane Burley from Truth Out. Okay, by the way, Truth Out is holding a fundraiser at this point. It's really having a tough time. I think over the years they've been a very, very good publication, okay, a very, very important one. I'd certainly like to see them stay in business. On July 25th, day 58 of the continuous Portland, Oregon Black Lives Matter protests, says Shane Burley, thousands of protesters swarmed the Justice Center located in the city's downtown area. This was a crushing number of people, and they were joined by solidarity marches in other cities. Protesters pushed up against a fence that was raised around the federal buildings and anchored in cement blocks in an attempt to stop demonstrators from getting into the building as they had during previous nights. The vast majority of the crowd were wearing helmets, goggles, and gas masks or respirators in anticipation of the violence these federal officers have become famous for using. Some were holding up umbrellas or shields to block the MK9 pepper spray the officers had been using against the demonstrators. The police began firing off tear gas canisters into the crowd as protesters shot back fireworks and blew the gas back toward the building with industrial kitchen fans and leaf blowers. Eventually, at 1:15 a.m., federal officers, in conjunction with the Portland police, rushed the crowd, as protesters breached the fence, blanketing the area with tear gas and firing uh, um, impact impacts munitions that sent hundreds of protesters scrambling through the street of downtown Portland. Violence against protesters only continued to escalate, but they were largely unmoved, regrouping after the attacks only to continue the protests that have drawn international attention. Nearly 2 months have come and gone as the Portland protests continue night after night. Starting at the end of May in the wake of George Floyd's death, the demonstrations have completely altered the city and have set in a permanent protest culture. And demonstrations regularly pop up at different places throughout the city. They eventually all descend on the Federal Justice Center in downtown Portland, which is now boarded up like a fortress after nearly 60 days of sustained confrontations. While demonstrations are still certainly happening around the country, what is occurring in Portland is unique in that it has had an unbroken string of demonstrations that have maintained their energy even after the initial surge has died. One of the most obvious reasons is that the city has not matched the kinds of solutions that protesters are demanding. Defunding the police has become the dominant demand from the broad confederations of organizations involved in the protests. This has become explicit from groups like Rose City Justice, which emerged as a Black-led organization from these initial demonstrations. They're asking for Portland to defund the police department by $50 million each year and divert that to programs that can help the communities that need it. I think that Portland is unique in its openness to progressive ideas, and I think once it was given the opportunity to open its eyes that people have maybe had the privilege to not face, I don't think the government has given us any reason to stop getting out there, unquote, says Devin Boss, a founding member of Rose City Justice. Instead of policing as a solution, organizers want to beef up resources for kids in crisis, for people with mental health issues, and to treat the problems that often result in a police call as issues that need social support to be addressed rather than a baton and a gun. Instead of hearing the demand of $50 million, the city is offering much smaller cuts, closer to $15 million, which would eliminate 84 positions with the Portland Police Bureau and the elimination of particularly unpopular units such as the Gun Violence Reduction Team, formerly the Gang Enforcement Team, and the Transit Division. These two proposals are still worlds apart for a community set on abolitionism as an ideological principle. Quote, I think that Portland is a beast of its own, a different kind of beast. We have always been a type of peoples who have it in our heart and soul to sustain a movement like this. Also, I think the cause is so worthy, and just that there are so many organizations and individuals who have sprung up as a result just within the last 50 days, says Nushin Bakhtiar, another member of Rose City Justice. And quote again, they're all strategizing and organizing and talking and trying to get as creative and powerful that we can to spread the message and spread the voice. I also think it's really hard to go away when you have innocent people shot in the face with rubber bullets and tear gas. Makes you want to keep getting out there, doesn't it? Unquote. The next section asserts the police are openly brutalizing people. The first few weeks of protest were handled with incredible violence by the Portland Police Bureau, which leveled crowd control munitions and tear gas at protests and journalists alike. This led to lawsuits and injunctions that changed the approach that the police were able to take. But when Donald Trump ordered federal agents into the city, the dynamic became even more hostile. Quote, "It is simple. People are witnessing police brutality firsthand. With the government's inaction against the coronavirus pandemic, people are becoming more aware of the failing system," unquote, says Jeremy Smith, member of the activist media collective Defend PDX. Quote again, "I believe that people are starting to realize the joke we call our representative government and learning that it only benefits a select few. Our representatives are silent, and their inactions echo with each, quote, non-lethal, quote, bullet fired into a crowd. The people have had enough," unquote. The purpose of the officers is confusing to many. They move in and out of the space and offer little communication to protesters or the press. Instead, they use crowd control dispersal tools that are known to cause incredible injury. One protester, Donovan Labella, was hit in the head by a munition and ended up in critical condition with a skull fracture. His life permanently altered. Street medics, who are civilians trained to give emergency triage care at protests, are poised around the demonstrations, often having to drag injured people from what feels like a war zone. Quote, "I believe that protesters participating in direct action downtown understand that their role is essential to the movement, even if the specific demands remain unclear. If demonstrations were ineffective and threatening state power, law enforcement would respond with tear gas and rubber bullets," says Gabby Albano, also to Defend PDX collective. Quote again, "People continue to fight because of police retaliation. It certainly speaks to the resiliency of the protesters and the gravity of this cause," unquote. Standoff has now begun in Portland as Trump keeps what amounts to federal troops on the streets of the city against the wishes of local officials, maintaining a, quote, law and order, unquote, that kind of message as he ramps up his campaign. For a party that is built on trumping up the message of states' rights, quote unquote, the Trump administration has started to forego the authority of the state and impose something akin to military street authorities. The officers and right-wing journalists and politicians have argued that this is an ongoing violent riot, but the reality is that these protests have been largely peaceful. On the evening of July 17th, there was no provocation that was visible, and on many nights, the excuse federal agents gave for attacking the crowds are that people are throwing empty water bottles or insults at the police. On July 22nd, Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler, who has been heavily denounced by protesters for his apparent unwillingness to stop the police, was hit by tear gas and told reporters he saw no provocation and called the federal officers' behavior, quote, urban warfare, unquote. On July 25th, while protesters had increased their militancy and commitment to pushing back on barriers like the fence, these actions amounted to little more than loud protest tactics, yet were met by crushing force. The issue of, quote, protester violence is largely one of a right-wing construct, taking things like vandalism and defensive strategies and reframing them as aggression. The violence of the federal officers, ranging from sending protesters to the hospital to running snatch and grab operations on them without charge, feels like a false equivalency. While freedom of speech is regularly tossed around as a rhetorical tactic, these protests should be a hallmark of the concept and would be welcome if this was even close to being a functioning democracy. The federal officers stationed in Portland seem determined to treat them as an enemy army, a combination of fear and threat. But it is the federal authorities who are the outside occupying force. The approach is a shock and awe combination of military style tactics whose only function appears to be to frighten the protesters into staying at home. This violates the most basic precepts of how law enforcement is supposed to deal with political demonstrations. Their ostensible function is not to intimidate demonstrators into ending their protected protest activity. Quote, maybe there are people who won't go out because of this intimidation tactic or looking over their shoulder. The police's ability to sow paranoia in activist circles is pretty well known. COINTELPRO doesn't need to actually exist for them to use the specter to scare people, says Juan Chavez, the Northwest Regional Vice President of the National Lawyers Guild. Quote, the same can be said of federal troopers. They only have to do it a few times to get the point across. That said, people aren't going to back down either, unquote. When a political mercenary like Trump is at the helm, the conventional rules of engagement are being torched. Black Lives Matter protesters are vastly unpopular in Trump's base, and right-wing social media is filled with reactionary demands to tamp down the protests with force. Trump's decision to use a narrow executive order to keep the federal officers in Portland appears as a cynical campaign move, a show to his supporters that he can keep civil unrest under control. This weakens the autonomy of the state of Oregon, the freedom of protesters to voice opposition without retaliation, as is the civil right of the opposition, and the ability of the press to cover the biggest story of the year. Now Trump is sending officers to Chicago and is promising more to be sent to other liberal cities. I don't know if I would call them liberal cities as much as cities governed by people who claim to be liberal or who claim to be progressive. Owning up to his promise to intervene on Democratic strongholds, he has expressed displeasure in. This escalation has been seen by many as connected to the issue of police brutality and the far-right usurpation of human rights that is in progress. This is likely the greatest reason why the demonstrations are growing again, because this has become a dire situation where the expansion of state power has to be confronted. If this siege is allowed to continue, it will come at the cost of every political freedom that the residents depend on, and will be evidence that the president can use the Department of Homeland Security as a private, quote, secret police, unquote, to make political attacks in advance of an election. Without any threat to, quote, Homeland Security from protests that rarely surpass a few hundred, this neglects the basic precepts that would justify the use of federal authorities. If Trump is going to treat federal law enforcement as a workaround for establishing a veritable martial law in liberal cities he dislikes, then the civil liberties of dissenting voices in the United States have been torched. The opposition filed in courts will likely come to a head in the coming days, but the problem is that these lawsuits still rely on the idea that the courts and the government are neutral. If Trump is using federal mandates to suppress speech and to go around the procedure, there is no guarantee a favorable ruling will have any profound effect for those being tear-gassed on the ground. The only solution is for a movement around the country to stand in solidarity with those in Portland and to use the same people power, quote unquote, that Trump finds so threatening. He has armed forces patrolling a U.S. city, and if we do not want this to become the standard, we're going to have to hit the streets ourselves. The solidarity actions are starting to pick up steam. And in the adjoining demonstration in Seattle on July 25th, police declared a riot and dozens of arrests were made, matching the intensity that has marked Portland's responses. A reflexive dynamic is emerging as cities surge in militant street confrontations and Trump sends in federal officers to show that he can take control. This is a self-reinforcing cycle that will guarantee the protests continue to escalate. If anything pushes these protests to a radical direction, it will be the repeated assaults from officers dressed in military fatigues with their weapons of urban warfare. The only option for protesters is to put as much pressure as possible to end these occupations. And with the tensions raised, they have the possibility of pushing political concerns with the deployment of federal agents and into the very idea of policing itself. This cauldron may be what is required for an abolitionist abolitionist politics, I think he meant to say, to take hold and make gains. The only thing that will determine the course of this situation is whether the protests can continue and bring the situation to a head. The reality is that radical change is determined primarily by social movements, and the people have decided that they're going to stay in the streets rather than accept a new normal of Trump's military occupation. I thought that was extremely well done, but I think a lot is going to depend, on how many people choose to go out into the streets and to stay there, and how that number compares with the number of federal troops that Trump actually can call on to deploy in the various cities. We don't know how many those are, at this point, what his real power is. We also don't know to what extent the people who go into the streets can maintain their discipline to be primarily peaceful demonstrators who are taking punishment for exercising their rights of free speech, and free assembly. As much as it hurts people who are in the streets, have to do that. Because as Bo, the fifth column, said the other day, the goal of these protests is ultimately to change politics. It's to swing people. It is a PR campaign to insist on our civil liberties and to insist that they be operational in the cities. And for that PR campaign to be won, to be victorious, it's necessary that the resistance that it provides to fascism be nonviolent resistance. That is what we're facing now. There's no question that these kinds of tactics are fascist tactics. Tom Hartman had a live stream today, Okay, it was close to the lunch hour. Okay, and it reported on police, the federal police, sexually assaulting women in the course of doing their job. And one particular woman, a 37-year-old attorney, okay, and a mom, uh, who came close to being raped by people in the federal police force. And Tom remarked, he said, this kind of activity, this is at the core of fascism. This kind of violence is at the heart, uh, uh, um, is at the heart of fascism. I think Tom was right about that. It's through the use of violence to terrorize people out of their rights that the fascists can ultimately take control. So, if we maintain these protests, we maintain the protests against what they're doing, against the brutality they're using, okay, and against the type of police forces we have themselves, then in the process of resisting, many of us will be brutalized, just as the Indians who won their independence from the British were brutalized in the course of their nonviolent struggles. They were brutalized and they were tortured, but they stuck with the program, and eventually they won. Eventually they won. Nonviolence can work, but we have to stick with the program. People have to exercise their civil liberties without becoming violent. And they have to do it night after night after night until the momentum builds for change among the public sufficiently for the change to be made. Next, citing fears of a defeated Trump who won't go willingly. Senator Warren calls on cabinet officials to end deployment of federal agents against the protests. This was by Owen Higgins also on July 29th, 2020, today. And the article has a picture, okay, of Elizabeth Warren. And specifically citing Donald Trump's refusal to commit to leaving office if he is defeated in November as a potential flashpoint for nationwide demonstrations. Senator Elizabeth Warren on Tuesday sent a letter to 4 senior cabinet officials asking them to commit to not deploying any more federal agents to quell domestic protests either before or after the upcoming elections. The President Warren wrote in her letter, quote, has used these forces who were improperly trained, unsuited for their operation, and have engaged in legally questionable tactics and arrests in American cities, despite clear opposition from governors, mayors, and citizens who are exercising their First Amendment rights in the communities in which these federal personnel have been deployed, unquote. And she tweeted in reply to herself, we're less than 100 days out from Election Day, and Trump is exploiting the protests to run fear-mongering TV ads. I'm worried that Trump will take more dangerous and outrageous actions to pit federal officers against their own people in the days before and after the 2020 election. The letter addressed to Defense Secretary Mark Esper, Attorney General William Barr, Acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf, Secretary of the Interior David Bernhardt, raises concerns that agents from the respective departments will be used for future domestic actions against people exercising their right to protest. Quote, the deployment of federal paramilitary officers against civilians is a historic embarrassment for our nation and harms the United States' standing in the world, writes Warren. It has also contributed to the valid concern that President Trump, with the complicity of agency heads that agree to send these personnel, is turning your department's personnel into tools of authoritarianism. She should have used the F word there, perhaps. Warren adds, the potential for President Trump to activate domestic forces as his personal militia, quote unquote. As former Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge put it, recall Tom Ridge is a Republican, is even more disturbing given his ongoing refusal to reassure the country that he would abide by the voters' will and peacefully leave office if he is voted out, resulting in, quote, an unprecedented test of American democracy, unquote. I therefore write to seek your assurances that you will not allow the military or civilian forces under your control to be used by the president to suppress dissent and democracy. I think the most likely person to comply there could be Mike Esper, because he's got generals in back of him who will want to comply with Senator Warren's request. In addition to demanding answers from the agency heads on a number of related questions, the Massachusetts Democrat also asked them to commit to, quote, commit to refuse to deploy the military or federal law enforcement officers under your control domestically against peaceful protesters or otherwise against Americans in advance of the November elections, and refuse to deploy in a manner intended to intimidate voters on November 3rd. So that's the request. I think we need more letters like this and more requests of this kind from more senators. And we need pressure to be put on the Republican senators running for office to make their own declarations in their own letters asking cabinet officers to comply. It's essential that other senators besides Elizabeth Warren stand up in this way and call for this kind of control. Could be that's what Warren is trying to do. That's what she's trying to organize. If so, then kudos to her. But I think the public has to be made aware in the run-up to the election of the danger that Trump is not going to leave office in a peaceful way. And hopefully also that there are members of Congress of both parties that want him to leave office in a peaceful way if he loses on November 3rd. And so there we are. We have resistance by the people. We have some resistance by mayors and by governors. And now we're beginning to get some resistance from at least one senator. Let's hope that these resistors can come together in various ways to counter the movement towards fascism that is being led by the President of the United States, and that is gaining momentum as we speak. I will turn now to your comments. How long do I think the protests in cities will last? How long do I think the federal response will last, Johnny Garza? I think it may well last right up until the election. Evelina asked that the FBI is working with the New York City police. Evelina says the FBI always drives around in unmarked cars. Lana says, Jayapal took Barr to task. Yesterday was awesome. Yes, I saw it. It was awesome. Kay says, yes, it was Lana. She kicked his ass. I laugh out loud. Only verbally, unfortunately. Only verbally. We need to have impeachments both for Barr and for Trump. Evelina says, funny when she said, I'm starting to lose my temper, laugh out loud. Yes, it was funny because he was imposing on her time. It is her time. It's a short time. But when a congressperson is given the floor to interrogate a witness, that is her time, and she can manage it as she pleases. And the witness has no authority to manage it. It's like the witness on a stand in a courtroom. The witness is subject to the lawyer. It's the lawyer who manages the time. Lana says, I can't stand Barr. C-SPAN put up a question about him yesterday. I said I would like to hit him with my purse. Evelina says, I would throw the nearest object to me at him, laugh out loud. Kay says, hi, Carmen. Evelina says, smiles. Carmen says, hi, Kay. On this account to share and invite for just a second. Wi-Fi always kills my connection on this device. What is IC related to the FISA court? I'm not sure. I expect it may refer to Intelligence Council. I'm not sure. Sandy says, it's good here. Evelina says, is that international? Hang on a second. I'm going to double check my sound and see that it's still the way it's supposed to be. No, it is not. I'm going to adjust it again. So my mic is handling things. Okay. Kay says Tom Hartman was getting all kinds of reports out of Portland and some from Seattle. 2 yesterday. Yes, he was, but I was talking about his reports today. Evelina Ponte International Court, maybe. Evelina says they're pulling out of Seattle, but Oregon. Lana says, no, you are fine. Carmen says, on condition. Evelina says, no problem with my sound. Sandy Deck says, all good. Evelina says, Carmen. Hi, Carmen. Sandy Deck says, Carmen is Carmen, not Avro. Evelina says, I still get the delay. I still have connection. Hope I didn't just jinx myself. Carmen is an actress, a.k.a. Avro. My phone tried to say Abdul. Evelina said, haha. Steve Wolfbrand said, I'm late. Hi, Steve. Why are you late? Don't tell me you were in Portland. Carmen said, Evelina, I tried to greet you back, but device was acting wonky. Carmen, you're getting poor Avro in trouble one day. Kay says, hi, Steve. And Steve says, is this the real Carmen? Evelina says, hi, Kay. Evelina says, Carmen Munez. Carmen says, Avro, Ape, as we call her, is my roomie. She lets me borrow her device when this one acts a fool, which is often during live stream. Evelina says, Steve Wolfbrand. Steve says, Abdul is actually Avro on Carmen's device. It's complicated. Steve Wolfbrand laugh out loud for a second or two. Carmen says, no, I only use her to listen to Dr. Joe. Evelina says, you called the president Herr Fuhrer, though. Laugh out loud. Kay says, talked to my daughter in Florida a while ago. Now she's worried about an up-and-coming hurricane headed in the South Florida direction. Evelina's smiles. Evelina says, oh. Carmen says, that was Avro, the evil twin. A pretty name, Avro. Is that French? It is French. It's the French word for April. Carmen says, so the weather predicts, but they've been wrong all week. So her name is April. She's named after the month April. Sandy says, hi, Steve. Evelina says, I prefer Carmen now. Steve says, I think it's Spanish for April. And Evelina says, Steve, no, that would be Abro. But the French is Avro. I know because that was my language in school. That was my first foreign language in school. My second was Russian. I was better at French than I was at Russian. Carmen says, yes, she's Haitian and Spaniard. Oh, you mean she's part Haitian and part Spaniard? Steve says, hey, Sandy Degg. And Evelina says, Carmen, okay. Kay says, well, I'm hoping, as she said it already, has been raining most of the time there. And her rented room is an old house with a termite problem. Shake my head. You mean half Dominican, right? Carmen Muniz, half Dominican. Carmen says, tell our orange oil gets rid of termites. Oh, but we just stew orange rind everywhere or boil them down to concentrate and spray it everywhere. Cheaper. Deborah Wilson says, late. Hiya, Deborah. Nice to see you. Late or not. Steve says, it'd be nice if we could all meet up in person someday. It would be great. Evelina says, Carmen Muniz is so resourceful. Steve says, maybe at Doc's place. Kay says, me too, Steve. Evelina Pond says, no. She said, a Spaniard. Steve Day says, hit the streets. Carmen Muniz says, oh, you don't have an N on your keyboard, do you, for Espana? And for Muniz, I mean. Carmen says, thank you, friend. Not having a lot of money on hand forces one to become innovative and resourcefulness. Orange drawing tea is also wonderful for chest congestion. Don't throw them away. Evelina says, my mother uses it. L. Stephen, I've hit the streets many, many times, but I'm leaving this one to the youngsters. I'm in a bad category for the COVID. Now, not as bad as my category, Steve. Carmen says, no, it's damaged. I'm switching devices. Typing on here is like pulling teeth. Kay says, but you and me both, Steve. I hit the streets in the 60s and early 70s. Me too. Carmen Muniz says, I hear you. And here's Avro. Evelina Pont, all hail moms. Kay says, I'm hoping the younger generations will save us all this time. Steve Gonza says, attack civilians, then come back and attack the first responders who arrive to help them. It is, of course, forbidden by the Geneva Convention. And there's a link to what happened in Seattle. Steve says, I support them 100%. Damn, only 10 viewers, Avril said. I invited tons. Evelina says, reminds me of Chile. Me too, Steve. Avril says, okay, 13. Me too. Yeah, it's at 12 now. Evelina says 15, but it varies. It's chemical warfare. Thanks for trying, folks. Thanks for trying. Evelina says biology too. Evelina says Steve Wolfbrandt and biology. Kay says fascism is here, folks. Yes, it is. It's on the streets right now. It's on the streets right now. And if we don't get them off the streets, we're going to have it. Evelina says most living organisms react to pain. The GOP guy that doesn't like DT said for protesters to not give the federalists reason to play out DT's fascist agenda. I think his name is Herman Cain, but I can't remember for certain. I don't know. Herman Cain just caught COVID-19 at one of Trump's rallies. I think it was the rally in Tulsa. I don't think he's the GOP guy who's against Trump. Steve Wolfbrand says 3 out of 4 COVID survivors have damaged hearts, probably lifelong, with biomarks of people who have had heart attacks. There's more going on here than meets the eye. Meanwhile, the Klan is getting more and more vocal. Steve says Avro is back. Kay says, I have a North Carolina FB friend that is getting tested now. She works at Helmart, laugh out loud. She calls it anyway. Evelina says, I was referring to getting hit over the head by bullies. And Steve Gonzo shared something, but I can't tell what it is. Avril says, yeah, they can't be identified, so they can rape and maim, kill, or whatever they want. Tom is right. That is beyond horrible and disgusting. Evelina says, women and gay men were sexually assaulted in Chile by security forces a little while ago during their violent protests. Doesn't surprise me. Supremacists infiltrating BLM. Hashtag Richmond. Avril says, just like MLK and his marchers, they mistreated them so much. Pinera is a violent man, yes. Nonviolence won in South Africa as well, helped by divestment, and boycott. Warren is just now speaking up. I guess she just crawled out of her teepee. Well, she may have crawled out of her teepee, but the fact is that, I don't see anyone else except for Jeff Merkley who's speaking up for his state. I don't see other senators speaking up. I don't see Joe Biden speaking up. I don't see Joe Biden using the F word. It's long past time that he did that with respect to Trump. Steve says she was doing a sweat lodge with her tribe. Steve says, looks like Kamala as VP. How bad can this get? Kay said, I was just going to say that, Steve. Shake my head. Evelina says, Rice is being vetted. Kay says, Rice is no better, Evelina. Evelina says, I agree. Kay says, I think Biden wants to lose. Laugh out loud. Evelina says, secretly you mean? Steve says, I hate the word homeland, as in the DHS. Hitler used that word a lot. Yeah, all dictators use that word a lot. That's a favorite of theirs. The homeland or the motherland or the fatherland, but it's basically our land. It's basically a nationalist word, not a patriot's word. It's a nationalist word. Kay says, maybe others pushed him into running. Well, the story is that his son did, just before his son died. He asked Joe to promise that he would run for president again. His son, Bo, I'm talking about. Evelina says, sound better in Spanish, patria. And in French also, patrie. P-A-T-R-I-E in French. And Steve says, Biden's VP is practically POTUS. Sleepy Joe won't last a year. VNC was scared to death of Bernie. Yes, translates to Heimland. Very Nazi-esque. Evelina says, fatherland, kind of anticulated. What's anticulated, Evelina? But it works. Steve says, but patria does sound wonderful. I think, however, patria includes culture as well. Evelina says, most definitely. Avril says, Michael Steele. Avril says, we will need an underground. Kay says, Biden didn't want to run. He was pushed into it. Avril says, toxic jingoism. Will the real Carmen please stand up? But in Latin America, La Patria Grande includes everyone in the region, Dr. Joe. Good to know. And Louis Gohmert, hashtag mass cold, has the CV. The CV being the COVID, says Steve Gonzo. Avril says, no. I feel like being Abdul right now. Oh, I think what you mean to say, Kay, is antiquated, Evelina. Antiquated. Yes, Kay says antiquated, Evelina. Laugh out loud. Yes, that's it. Antiquated is correct. Patria. Arrive. Contro della tirannia. Oh, yeah, he caught it. Steve says, Sybil? Steve Gonzo says, hashtag voodoo medicine. It was Steve Wolfbrand who asked Sybil. Other comments or questions? If not, I will end here. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for sharing. Thank you very much for participating. I'll be on again tomorrow at roughly 9 p.m. As usual, if the creeks don't rise. In the meantime, have a wonderful night and have a wonderful day. And hopefully, okay, I'll see you then. And hopefully, I can get back my old sharing interface so this gets a little better.